Edward Ingham, dual national, British, Spanish, based out of Madrid, brought up in North Leeds. Been working in the pharma industry now for knocking on 10 years, selling into both startup and broader enterprise selling, predominantly consulting. I think what sort of brought me onto Marcus's radar and onto this podcast is I think a lot of salespeople fundamentally miss the point when interacting with prospects. They disregard the world that they're dealing with. They will product push. They probably won't take the time to bother to understand exactly the inner mechanisms and interplay between individual X prospect and whatever they're going through. And I think this is something that salespeople, not necessarily SMEs, more so the sales representatives, should be taking upon themselves to do, and then feeding that internally and making a positive impact.
Hello and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today my guest is Ed Ingham. Ed has been an avid listener of the podcast for some time, but today what we're really going to be doing is going very deep, not into the theory, but into real moments that shaped his journey. And we're going to explore what wasn't working, what he tried, and how he eventually found something that worked and stuck. And we're not going to be pulling any punches. The objective here is to use this as a learning exercise for all of you. And for those of you who want to understand your customer, we've structured it so it is a customer interview in the style of Jobs to Be Done. So for those of you who are not familiar with it, I would urge you to go out and read a book called Demand Side Sales by Bob Moesta, Moesta. It's a really fantastic grounding. And along with that, I would also recommend you read Charlie Green's book, Trust-Based Selling. They are the two foundational works that I believe make all the difference. And you'll find that once you've read them, how much Ed's journey maps to those two books, whether it was by design or accident. I'm really excited to have you here. So Ed, welcome.
Thank you very much. Excited to be here.
Would you mind just giving us 60 seconds on what you do now, and then we'll go into your history?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Edward Ingham, dual national, British, Spanish, spent most of my life been brought up in North Leeds, and spent the last 2 years living in Madrid. And I guess from a more professional stance, I've spent the last 10 years now selling directly into enterprise, pharmaceutical companies, and also right down to startups. And I've seen recurring themes from a sales perspective in what happens that's almost identical within the two organizations. And before I get onto a high horse here, I'm a 30-year-old, been battered and bruised for most of those 10 years and learned some pretty bloody good lessons along the way. But yeah, no, delighted to be here, and
Excellent.
This kind of content's invaluable.
Well, let's start with where you were right at the beginning of that sales career when you were trying to work out what to do. I'm very curious. Take me back to that moment where you realized that something had to change.
It's an interesting question. So I would say this is twofold, and this was probably 5 years in to a product peddling personality where I was fundamentally unclear why people would be potentially getting so angry by salespeople, and in this case specifically me. So I would say it was twofold. The point when I had an epiphany was when I went from thinking, why is this human being getting so bloody angry with me? Previously, it was, why would this CBO, CEO, whatever, been getting so angry? And I'd be thinking, there's a technicality in the product or whatever we're missing. Complete crap. Why is this human being getting so bloody frustrated with whatever I'm doing? Why am I bothering them so much? And at the point of that switch where I went from looking at the role, the company from the prospect side, to actually looking at myself in the mirror and also what my actions are doing to that person, it was a very powerful moment, because that's when you start thinking, would I appreciate what I'm doing to somebody? And you think, before you think, well, it's my job. I'm being told by my boss I need to reach out to people. And then when you get back to it, you think, it's not conducive to actually having any form of relationship, personally, professionally, with anybody, if you're pushing them. I think we all know that. So I guess the first part was that. And the second part was, and this has been a very recent transition, is actually bothering to spend time to understand the client, let's say the prospect world. There's far more to it than them just sitting on a debit card account with a cash in it that belongs to the investor or whatever. And, they just kind of impulse purchase consulting platforms. And it's fundamentally not the way that it works. People need to sell as much as a salesperson needs to sell internally within their organization if they want to get anything done. And them saying, yeah, I'm really interested, give me a couple of weeks. You're like 20% through the sale. There's a massive marathon to go through for that to actually go through, where they need to probably have a load of uncomfortable conversations with people who may or not like them very much at that point in time. So that's what I would say has been kind of the epiphany moments.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's start with the negative first. What was it that finally broke your spirit to keep doing the old way?
It was probably mid-lockdown. There's one thing getting battered and bruised when you're in a boiler room office with 50 other people laughing at the same thing happening to them. When that's happening to you on your own in a very lonely apartment, I think it comes to the point where you're just thinking, is it me? What on earth is going on here? And I think that was the point where, and look, I don't want to overinflate your ego too much, Marcus, but it did coincide with when I started listening to the Inquisitor podcast. But that gave me a perspective where, because funny enough, you sounded very similar to these big, scary CEO I was speaking to in the UK, and I was thinking, he sounds identical. He's got this philosophy around how to actually question people to understand where they're at. And that was the point where I thought, you know what, actually, if you do move off the product, there's a big area here where you can have a conversation with somebody and get the information you will need to be able to qualify or disqualify someone.
Well, you will have heard this many times. In all of your dissatisfying relationships, the one constant is you. And if we don't learn that lesson very damn quick, we're going to find ourselves constantly pointing the finger of blame, making excuses, and not making progress. So help me understand this then. In practical terms, what were the frustrations that you were facing in your role? Was it pipeline, forecasting? I mean, you've already mentioned bioreaction, so that was clearly something.
It's the sense of rejection, and if anyone's working in a boiler room environment, you could be facing rejection 3-4 times an hour. And if you're doing long hours in a day, I mean that's a hell of a lot on an annual basis. Somebody saying no to you, and that I think was probably the thing, and that leads into the point. Taking something that they're rejecting your product, right? As a salesman, if you're taking that emotion, they're not rejecting you as a person. They're rejecting whatever you're putting in front of them. So I think that was probably the part where I was thinking, I fundamentally can't take being told to piss off 3 to 5 times a day. Occasionally you get a yes, put a plaster on the issue, but most of the time it was that. And that's the point where I'm thinking, I'm not helping anybody here. I'm doing the opposite.
I'm going to take slight issue because never pass up a teachable moment. People don't reject you, your proposition, your product. What they reject is the uncertainty. They reject the lack of safety. What buyers are looking for is to make the right decision. They don't want to make the wrong decision. They don't want to make the right decision badly because it'll backfire. They want to know that if they're going to buy something, it will deliver the outcome they intend. And unfortunately, in sales, we have a tendency to forget that buyers buy for their reasons, not ours, at their time of choosing. And anything that we do to try and create false urgency then creates distrust. It creates uncertainty in their brain. The brain's default setting is the worst case scenario. So I'm guessing somewhere along the lines, you had those moments where a warm or even hot buyer suddenly went cold. When that happened, what did you do in order to learn and improve?
Well, I think at the point of early sales role, what people fundamentally don't do is take a step back and think, why is this person ghosting me? They came through our website, they've asked for information. Why on earth are they now, what the hell are they doing? Where people go wrong, I think, is not probing into and actually thinking what on earth could be happening, self-reflecting and thinking, probably wasn't me. It's probably something going on in their life. Maybe they've got something internally that's just taking precedent over this. Maybe this was a priority 3 task. Which is a way that now I take, that 5 years of not doing that is an incredibly painful process where you're just constantly thinking people are mugging you off and that they're really not there. We just haven't asked them, is this really important for you? Nobody, you want to just nicely, let's get to the end of the sales cycle. Let's not offend anyone, make anyone feel uncomfortable. Fundamentally, you need to ask these questions, and there's an art to asking questions rather than just seeming abrasive. But I think it's about understanding why and understanding that in a prospecting call or in whichever interactions you're having with them, so that doesn't even go into the pipeline. Or if it does, it's going in at a stage where it's not going to be coming up on the screen when you're standing up in front of all the, intimidating senior guys at your company. You've got that in 2 years' time, you're thinking, yeah, not now, based on the fact that they've just told me they might be in the job. They might not be in the job 2 months later. Little things that people don't ask and they don't find out. And what does that mean? Pipelines get bulked up, loads of uncertainty goes upwards to the board and then the investors, and it's just become a mess.
Absolutely. And in fact, the hardest sale is managing the internal sale, because you have no control over that. You've got little or no input other than coaching your sponsors or champions, and often salespeople are reluctant to do that. When did you realize that your job was to be your customer's ally, not their accomplice and not their adversary?
It was the moment when implementing, and again, I really will refrain from pitching the Inquisitor podcast much further, but it really is the moment when you see implementing, even in an email, just in a way where you switch the tone up from what you would be doing normally in a meeting, in an interaction with a prospect, switching that to making it not fully, but just slightly more client-centric, and then seeing, oh, wow, okay, one, I got a response from somebody who never replies, two, they've responded in quite a positive way, and three, they actually sort of seem grateful I'm in the room rather than just wanting me to sit in a corner and behave myself. So I think the moment is when you just slowly start implementing it and seeing the immediate reward that the human brain likes certain things and doesn't like other things. It doesn't really matter whether that person have exited from 10 companies or a billionaire or whether they're an intern. Nobody likes being told what to do. Nobody likes being pushed. And the point where you start seeing that bringing returns emotionally and financially is the point where you think, right, okay, this is potentially the track to go forward on.
Okay, that's fantastic. I'm going to fish for one more little push for the Inquisitor, because I remember, emailed me or DM'd me on LinkedIn to tell me that you were listening to 2 to 3 hours a day, every day on your commute. And so you did something that other people wouldn't normally commit to, which is learning sales as a craft rather than a seminar. And you weren't looking for one-offs. You were doing it through immersion over time. So I'm really curious, over those thousands of hours that you've listened to, because it was around 1,200 hours a year.
Yeah.
So that's what, 7,000 hours that you've listened to my voice droning on and my guests bringing genius. What did you draw from the podcast that has been absolutely central and fundamental to who you've become and how you show up and prepare?
Very good question. I've always felt a sense of, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm a languages graduate and I work in a highly scientific part of the pharma industry. I'm probably not unique in a salesperson's role where I have that sense of imposter syndrome, that could be some tech, where where there's that kind of SME withdrawal syndrome where they're thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm not qualified to have this conversation. The client centricity, what I found it armed me with, and this is something I really preached to not particularly senior sales guys. I'm talking out of uni, feeling a little bit nervous around, how do I actually act in these client interactions? It gives you a differentiation versus, and this is what really drove me to just listen to more and more and more of this. My recommendation would be probably live nearer to your office and don't commute for 3 hours. But if you do have one of these painful commutes where you exercise in the morning or whatever, if you can consume this content, it can give you a very unique differentiator versus people who've been in their career for 30 years in sales who may still product push. They may vomit on the client and the product spiel. And then you just still see that blank response from the prospect where they go, right, okay, I will let you know. And then they ghost them. The kind of the Moorish feeling that I was getting from this content is the fact that it was giving me less imposter syndrome. I was actually more comfortable to sit in front of people, humans, not senior people, and senior staff. I regard them now as human beings with real emotions, just like mine. And it's a differentiator. You can be pushing a commoditized product. If you're really adopting client centricity, it is amazing at what you can see difference in terms of how people potentially prioritize you over another service that they might be using. Why? Because you've got the emotional side of it with them. They understand that you will give them exactly the correct answer. What's better, you or your competitor. There's no bullshitting around it. And I think that's something that just gave me this real intrinsic desire to keep going. And, I'm a big fan of being productive rather than just sitting there on TikTok or whatever the kids use nowadays. And, this was a good way, an easy way. And I actively despise reading. So it's just a good way of just getting content into my mind. And here we are. So, and it gives you opinions, which is something I didn't really have in sales before this.
Well, again, if we look at what you do differently, I'm curious about the difference in your results over the 5 years. What's your close rate in terms of sales that you actually start and put into the CRM, as opposed to leads that marketing throws your way and you have to follow up or ignore? When you start a sales cycle, how many of those would you expect eventually to become a customer?
The big difference is very, very little of what would go into my pipeline would be unqualified. Why? Because if you are client centric, what does that give you back? Insight from the client as to where they're at, whether they are actually in a position or even have a desire to procure from you, rather than just being cordial on a phone. If you don't ask these questions and don't give them this kind of, and show them the interest that you actually want to understand where they're at and when it might make sense or not make sense to purchase. So I think the exact number I'm not sure, but the opportunity in CRM to close, when that goes in, typically it'll go in at a stage 3 out of 5, so like a submit proposal. Why? Because before that it hasn't been qualified, and at the end of the meeting, not that I'm some dream closer here, but it won't go in until I'm absolutely satisfied that the person on the other end of the line is one, in a position where they need what I want, and they're comfortable that the internal stakeholders that they themselves will then need to pitch, just like I've done to them, and be successful or unsuccessful, are in a position where they're ready to speak. So the close rate is very high. The opportunities in are, I would say, pretty low, but that certainty is much higher, which gives you the ability to, you can communicate upwards, which is valuable. Not many salespeople can do that.
Well, what is the job of a seller? Is it to book meetings, or is it to get customers for life?
Exactly. It's the forecasting and getting, if you go in with the mentality of whatever we work on and close this year, in the next 2 years, I don't give a rat's ass about, I want you to be buying from me in 10 years' time. When that dynamic comes into your meetings, to make it, the conversation will completely switch. And that's where you can have a 10-minute conversation minimum with somebody around their world, rather than going straight into, hi, how are you? Boom, into the product.
Well, what's interesting is when salespeople make that shift from trying to transact or book a meeting to showing up and prospect for a customer for life, the entire tone of the conversation changes. And the emphasis isn't on trying to get somebody over the line. It's on genuinely trying to understand that other human being, what their life is like, the pressures that they're under. And when you made that shift, what did you notice by way of a reaction from the other person?
This was really quite remarkable. People, and it sounds very simple, people actually want to spend time with you. You could send an email. You don't need to follow up and say, how did you get my last email? Just wondering, just checking in. Those emails become effectively redundant. You can get in front of people so long as you continue to deliver value, and they're just as invested in the conversations as you are. You can get, you're seeing that people actually, that feeling of, oh, this person's doing me a massive favor, they're giving me 15 minutes. Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Prospect. That just completely goes out the window. And something I would just, as a side note, that's something I'd really urge senior and even down to the junior level sales reps to consider. How did you feel last time you were in touch with a recruiter, buying a phone contract, any kind of sort of, there are varied severity between the two there, but how did that person make you feel? You might not remember the exact words in that conversation, but you're damn sure to remember how the person made you feel. Were they pushing you at their own, for their own merit, at the expense of your career or phone contract, whatever that might be? And this is something that can really transition the way that salespeople think, even at a very junior level, where they think, what did I like or strongly dislike about that interaction? Most people, we all deal with recruiters, right? When we're looking for what's on the market and so on. That's a very good way, because sellers typically wouldn't be in a position where they're going to be procuring from another business. That's typically not realistic under the age of 30, 40.
Yeah.
What is realistic is that you're going to be in a selling environment and need to remember how that other person made you feel. And then if you liked it, follow that, because that's the ticket. If you didn't, that's exactly what you might be doing and need to avoid.
What do you no longer need to ever do, apart from those just following up emails, that you look at other people in similar identical positions and they seem to spend their time on those dead activities?
Hours and hours with people who, prospects who could be tire kickers. I work in a very small industry where, you see the same faces regularly. There are some people who may be very polite, but have absolutely no interest in procuring one service at any given point in time. But still, without asking those, say, tough questions and understanding more about that person's professional role, how on earth are we going to know that they're not interested and they're never going to buy? They might just want a friend, So it's hours, I think, that could be reinvested in doing other things, self-improvement, sales enablement. I think there's a lot of waffle in pipeline discussions, which must be a bloody nightmare for investors.
Yeah.
Where there's, and not through any bad etiquette, really, just if there's a lack of clarity. Sometimes people don't necessarily know when there's a lack of clarity. We're having a really solid relationship in place with whoever's potentially going to procure what you do. It's very hard to forecast that up, and that has a recurring cycle that goes up to a chief exec through to an investor. That can affect all sorts of things. And I think there's a real purpose a salesperson can have here by starting on their small scale and building gradually, that can really ease clarity and provide everybody with what they need, and figure out, do we have a sales problem or not? Because having lots of empty pipeline, busy opportunities, empty pipeline is a real bloody problem, I can imagine, from an upwards down perspective.
Well, it's the lifeblood of the business, and if you can't depend on the forecast, you can't invest. So you always have to save for a rainy day, and that lack of investment means that you can't innovate, you can't get ahead. We see this all the time because people are operating out of fear. So that then brings us to the next key question, which is, as you move to this principled customer-centric type of selling style, um, what were the elements of it that really stood out and were a significant departure from what you were being told to do by senior management? And what was it at that point you decided, I'm going to take the risk and I'm happy to get fired for doing the right thing instead of doing it badly?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I mean, I'll speak broadly across the industry here, and just in terms of what I see, and yeah. So just to kind of give a broad example, and I think something that a salesperson can do very well is, Marcus, frankly, I know what you're asking for. Competitor down the road probably does it better. Is the absolute, the absolute minimum kind of gesture that we owe to people who are looking to purchase. If they're coming with something that's well out of scope, yeah, is it feasible? Probably. Can they get it cheaper, better, quicker from somebody else? Yes. Absolute duty to do that. I don't see that done very much, and haven't done across my career. I think people are scared. I think it's seen, looked upon badly. That's something I feel people should be doing, is just, being, to avoid being morally corrupt. Yeah, there are more. Trying to think what else might be.
Can you remember what the first shifts were in conversations, planning, mindset?
Yeah, I mean, I think the client will reciprocate, right? You'll get a request in from somebody, you'll say this isn't for us, at the expense of a sale. Let's face it, everybody likes money, everybody likes getting paid. You've done something very honest at the expense of yourself for the benefit of the customer. What does that get long term? They'll remember you to start off with. It's pretty bloody uncommon for a salesperson to say, go and spend your money with somebody else. Probably not for me. That's a pretty endorsing personality trait. Very uncommon. Very good way of differentiating yourself in a fair amount of salespeople knocking around the world. And then what does that get? That gets you down the line. I'm going to be remembered by somebody if I do that. They'll probably come back to me, because then our proposition will be crystal clear in their mind. So in essence, you've actually succeeded in what most salespeople get up in the morning for, right? Spread the word, clarity, so everybody's aware of what they do, and when they need it, they'll come and buy it. You can do that with a good gesture.
Well, you've touched on something really important, which is that buyers go through their journey and we have to meet them where they actually are, not where we wish they were.
Right.
So if what we have is not timely, it's not relevant, or it's not valuable to them, A, we have no business selling it to them. But secondly, trying to push them to buy when any one of those conditions is not met is likely to result in resistance and pushback. So where did you hit resistance from your own team, from your own management?
I mean, and again, this isn't specific to what I'm doing at the moment, but I mean, over the roles I've done and the consistent themes I hear, even just speaking to other sales reps in the industry, is obviously we've all got our own pressures in hitting a number. That's the whole point and the whole game of sales. I think there's a mismatch between hitting a number and how that is, and how to hit that number. And I think people think that, I know, you can't be giving that to the competitor. We need that revenue. Yeah, but if we look at this long term, they're probably going to appreciate the way that we've done this. If we point, using the example of a competitor, which can come with nerves and resistance. Because why? Because people don't have big enough pipelines, because that's not meeting a target that needs to be set to please somebody else. And then there's this just huge knock-on cycle. Whereas if sales were to be done properly from the beginning, honestly, on a large scale, which is fundamentally feasible, people will remember what you've done. If it's they'll think, oh, there's a sales rep down the road, did a marvelous job, helped us out by giving us a competitor we didn't even know about. I'll go back to him when I need it. That would be a more sustainable way, in my opinion. But I appreciate, there's pressures from above where people can behave erratically and think we need as much money as we can get and we can't lose a deal, which isn't feasible. It's not realistic.
Absolutely. Okay. So how has operating in this way affected how you live, how you see yourself conceptually, and how you feel about who you are when you're selling?
This this is a really good question. And to be honest, it's what you can deploy in your professional career around, not around clever questioning and reply to a question with a question and get to the bottom and manipulate people's minds. I don't think that's the way of doing it. But this sense of being client centric is very easy to replicate in being human. It's not client centric, it's human centric, right? Understanding where somebody's at, why they're behaving a certain way, and going from there. That is very easy to do. You can transition that into different facets of your life. I won't say I'm a completely nice bloke by any stretch of the imagination, but I think there's been big improvements in terms of understanding why the world is working as it is, it's probably not that person's fault. Maybe they do that, and that can really transition the way that somebody's brain works, and that can, for the good of everybody here, it's a trait that can be very useful, and it makes you a lot bloody happier, to be honest. You're not going home thinking, oh, I've been shouted at 10 times today. You're actually going home and you're thinking, you know what? I know I've helped that person and they wouldn't have got that without me, and I'm sitting in a sales role, and that's usually the antithesis of sales, right? Not helping and just being a disruption. And you're going home and you've just said, so exactly, yeah, that's how I'd summarize it.
I think a lot of people look at sales and they forget that, done well, you're facilitating good decisions and you're empowering people to make the change, make the outcome, the better future that they want to happen. That makes our work important and meaningful. We diminish it the minute we turn it into a commodity and the minute we turn what we do into a weapon. Our questions have to empower the other person to move forward, help them understand a little bit more of their reality, because let's face it, most of our customers have created the conditions that they have to put up with because of the decisions and choices they made before. And in most organizations, they forget that not only are they the architects of their own troubles, but their failure to take ownership of that means that they tend to look for symptoms to fix. As a result of now being much more customer-centric and focused on their outcome, what is it you find is happening in terms of the type of dialogue, the referrals that you get, the multi-threading?
Yeah, so just on a sort of an operational logistic level, I'll get messages from people from their personal phone straight to mine saying, "Hi, can we chat later?" That would have been unheard of 5-10 years ago, frankly. Be more likely to get blocked. The little things like that, you'll get messages. You'll realize that actually I don't need to do that much work on this account because I've already got 2 people within there who know I'm not an arse. They know that when they need me, I'll be there. I'll do them a solid internally to make sure that they're getting suitable rates, good service. I'll follow it up and I'll come and see them ideally in person along the way. You'll suddenly get a message from somebody who you've probably been bombarding historically, and they'll go, "Oh, hi, yeah, just spoken to this person. I am actually interested in this as well. Can we chat?" So you think, hang on, I've done less work. I've structured it in a different way, and now I've got somebody coming to me needing something.
So
I mean, it's closed, by the way, but that's it's an endorsement of good behaviour.
So how much less prospecting do you have to do to keep your pipeline full enough for you to hit or exceed quota?
I'm a bit of a rare case for this because I'm a prospecting addict, and I'm struggling to wean myself off the old ways. But I think in terms of there's critical mass versus quality, and I think the volume has probably remained the same. It's just it's more efficient, right? It's using previous examples of things that you've done for other bit, and I'm talking enterprise here. It's startups where you haven't worked with a company makes it a little bit more challenging, but when it's an enterprise sale, there's ways where you can leverage other individuals, other departments within that company to then say, and then what do they do? This is something most salespeople are naively unaware of. People actually speak to each other in companies. If they get an email from a sales, I know, heaven forbid, with Microsoft Teams and the human desire to engage with others. Typically what will happen if they get an email is they'll probably go and speak to that person, or almost certainly that you've referenced in your email, or the department or something. Go and do their research. Nobody's stupid. And then that's up to however you've dealt with that previous person. And then if they've given you a good piece of feedback, then that's going to get you on. So in answer to your question, I think my prospect is probably the same, but it's around switching that, and it goes from being a project vomit, for want of a better phrase, to being something where it's conducive and you're letting people know that other people in whichever organization may or may not be using something that might be useful to them.
One thing I see in CRMs when we go and work with clients is the tendency to have only 1, maybe 2 points of contact. Typically, when you're working an account over the medium term, how many people would you expect to engage with in a client? 5, 6, 12?
Yeah, 12, more or less. And you need to have interactions with them that's not around the process that you're going through as well. And it needs to happen months and months before, even if that conversation seems relatively meaningless at the time. You don't want to be rushing to get, oh shit, we've got to get the procurement person involved because we haven't spoken to them before. You get them on the phone. You're busy, they're busy. What do? You quickly rush into what your agenda is, and then it's like a drive-by shooting. So the way of doing it is preempting that realistically. And like I said, I work in a small environment within the pharma industry where people know each other. You can quite easily forecast, even in enterprise big, large enterprise sales, you can preempt the kinds of people that you're going to need to engage with. If you're on site at their company, their office, you want to make it your business to be getting in touch with these people before you want anything or need anything or whatever you might want from that point. That's where it's a lot easier to do.
And how much earlier in the cycle are you bringing procurement in, legal, so that you don't end up at the back end with that painful, you close the deal, but then you have to negotiate?
Procurement is absolutely pivotal, and this has been a big learning. Again, this is the final time I'll give kudos to your podcast, but interviewing procurement, you're enjoying it too much. I can see your face, Mark, I'm about to stop. But procurement is a department that is not a well, it can be a barrier if sales is done wrong. Engaging with them with purely their interests at heart, and this is a department that's very hard to get on the phone when they think they're being sold to, when they think you're actually trying to do the good, good by them. It's remarkable how these people will get on the phone and they'll talk to you around what they need, and even when you're at the point of sale, have the decency to ask what their bloody KPIs are. They've got their own agenda. They've got stuff that they need to be doing. They're not just there as KPI, bulldoze through salespeople, make them feel nervous, push them, make them sweat. That's not what fundamentally goes on. They're trying to save the company money. They've got specific KPIs on contracts they need to achieve. Find that out, and it'll be in their interest to use you if it's a competitive bid and they're up against two companies that are parallel, and one of the sales reps actually had the decency to go and ask them, how can I make your life easier with this? And that's something where there are internal advocates at companies where, this client and procurement centricity can really be adopted.
There are a couple of episodes that are well worth going back to. The ones with Jill Robbins. She was one of the top 50 procurers worldwide, and very powerful messages there. The other one is Mark Schenkius, and he wrote a fantastically useful book called The Other Side of Sales. So he used to be in procurement, I believe, for Mars. And then he turned and started training salespeople to deal with procurement. And I can't stress enough how important that is. And the other one I would strongly recommend that you listen to, if you're listening to this one, is the one with Jacques Chamas, who was the CFO for Standard & Poor's, for Charles Schwab, TWA, if any of you are old enough to remember, Trans World Airlines. And understanding finance and the language of finance is critical. So again, over the years, what have you done to learn to adapt to your customer and meet them where they are using their language? And how has that changed your perspective, but also your outcomes?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. So I would say the absolute, I think the most fun I've had in my career and the most critical move that I made was moving to mentoring. Nothing official, not going on one of these glossy websites and going that way, going through the back door on LinkedIn, finding various different types of people who I've pissed off as a salesperson, which is a very bloody uncomfortable conversation, but it's a good one. Don't go to people that are just like you. You'll just it'd be like being in the, down your local pub. It won't be very valuable. Go to people as a salesperson that you pissed off. Procurement for mentorship. There's a way where you can craft an email which is, will merit a response, and the response rate and the generosity I've received has been humongous. People who deliver budget, if successful, to your prospect, to your engaging with on a daily basis, understand the interplay between their department and the person who you're pitching. What's their agenda? Does the purchasing decision and the release of budget, does that depend on the mood they woke up that day? Does it depend on a political argument that's going on between various departments? Is it an emotional thing from their side? Understanding all this interplay, clients directly, where you can have, because it's very hard again, referring to an enterprise or even a startup sale. It's very hard when you've got your SME and everybody else on the phone to suddenly start doing a counselling session with everybody on the phone and asking what's hurting them and what are their internal pressures. Who wants to do that in front of 5 people?
Yeah.
The way to do that in a very safe environment where preferably this to be face to face, where somebody's away from their office and they will maybe unleash a little bit more, is that, and that's something that's pivotal. I don't think many people are doing it. Most of the time it's free, and so long as you come prepared and with goodwill and you never abuse that and try and turn it into a sale, which is something to always get out in that first message to the person. Typically generosity is very high and you can usually get time from people, as it's quite flattering, it's quite nice of them to say, and people are always happy to help, right?
Can you share what your message is and what your success rate has been?
The message is, well, usually this is something that's got to be very concise because it goes through LinkedIn Connect, and you've got a limited amount of characters. Dear X, cheeky ask, appreciate this is completely out of the blue. Insert something that you valued with them, whether that's been direct contact with them. I really appreciate the impact I've seen you having at company X. There are infinite amounts that I could learn from you. Would you mind mentoring me for 15 minutes a month? If at any point I rock up unprepared, please feel free to cancel this. No strings attached agreement. Yeah, no hard feelings. If not, kind regards. And there was a second question.
And what's the conversion rate?
Conversion rate has been, I would say it's 100%, but compared to what I'd be used to prospecting, above 90%.
Wow.
The odd person will get back and say, really sorry, I just don't have time for this.
Yeah.
Which I think is also a nice mark of respect. They're not, they're going to not join something they can't commit to. But it leads you to think, what is triggered in the brain to get a response from this message, which is the same amount of characters as a message when I'm trying to pitch a product? Why am I getting a nice response from them? Or why am I getting people on the phone who would otherwise say, no, I don't want to listen to your product? When you can start figuring that out as a salesperson, and the fact that people act and behave and they drive their behavior by emotions, a very powerful train of thought to have when you can translate that into selling and using the content that they're giving you, understanding the person's world that you're going to pitch, and understanding that they don't have a debit card account. They need to do quite a lot. And there's implications if they purchase something well or badly, which need to be considered.
Well, and that's really key as well, because your prospect may be actively looking, but procurement and finance might not be, and other departments might not be. And our job is to choreograph that process so that we bring them all together when they are ready. And I think that's something that's been massively forgotten, but kudos to you. I mean, when we came up with that approach years ago, it was a punt, but it's worked every time. I mean, I've never found anyone who has failed to generate not only mentors, and some of them have up to 12 at a time.
Yeah.
These are people just like their customers who are willing to give them insight into what it's like to live and breathe that role, what Sunday evening feels like, what Monday morning looks like, the pressure that they're under, what gets them promoted, fired, what frustrates the living hell out of them, what makes their life easier. You're not going to get that except by speaking to people who live it. You can guess, but why bother? Get it straight from the horse's mouth.
And this is something I could, and to the more junior sales people who may be listening to this is something that is very, very easily applicable when you're early on in your career. It's a vulnerable move to make, and when you go to people who you even saying, I recognize that I really missed a trick when I was trying to sell to you X amount of years ago. I recognize that was fully on me. It's not hard to say no to somebody who's saying that, and then when you get on the phone, it's bloody uncomfortable. Who likes turning the ugly mirror around and thinking, Jesus Christ, what an arse I used to be. But what you can learn from that is, and that's the key, it's about doing it with a varied amount of different types of people, preferably not ones who are very similar to you, because they'll probably just tell you you're doing very well. It might be nice to see them at the weekend. Go to the people who are going to tell you you should stop and amend this or tweak that.
One fabulous exercise is the thank you, Mr. Prospect letter. Don't send it, but write yourself a letter saying, thank you, Mr. Prospect, every time I did this, I shouldn't have, and you did that. Can't blame you. And go through that process, because it's incredibly powerful to take stock of how you showed up and how people responded, because people reflect back what you project out. And if you're projecting out that you're trying to dip your hand in their pocket and take out the credit card, they will naturally be defensive. But what you've done there is you've exposed some vulnerability. You've created an opportunity to create a human connection. And human beings are social primates. We love to reciprocate. We love to contribute. I don't know of many people who don't derive more pleasure from giving a good gift than getting one.
Correct. Bang on.
Okay. So one of the hardest things in sales is scaling what you're doing that works without it all falling apart. How did you prevent yourself from falling back into the old habits or creating traps for yourself by thinking, oh, bloody hell, I've got this, and then forgetting that the customer should be at the heart?
The sentiment when you're doing, and look, when I say this, I've got plenty of improvements myself to make, but the sentiment where you are getting the affirmation, I would say, from other clients that you're doing something right, that you're yourself, you'll get it internally and externally, but the feeling that I found addictive that I frankly can't let go of is that feeling from clients when you're adding value. And frankly, even, I know you can slip from, going to the gym 5 times a week, whenever, and then slipping back into old habits. With this one, I found that the sentiment is so addictive of doing good by the customer, doing, and with that comes internal KPIs that you might need to be hitting. They come hand in hand typically, because you can just go and meet more people and do the same thing. They give you the affirmation, they give you, higher sales, whatever that might be. That feeling is very easy to hold on to once you've started getting it. And it's not something that you need to master. It's intent over skill, right? It's not something you need to master for 10 years, do a PhD. That's something you walk in to work one day, think, I'm just going to be a nice bloke today. I'm going to start by doing that. I'm going to ask them a question around that rather than telling them something that they should be doing. Very easy to implement very quickly. And as soon as you start getting that almost immediate recognition from the people, these human beings that you're interacting with, it's very hard to let go of. I haven't even considered it.
Agreed. And again, someone who I was inspired by and influenced by is Chris Stanham, and he was Zig Ziglar's bagman for 38 years. And he said, when you prospect for customer for life. And the net result of that is you show up and have a totally different conversation. If you're going to be working with someone for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and let's face it, if you're in your mid-20s, odds are you're going to be working until your mid-70s. And you've got 50 years where you could be working with the same people and both sides win, rather than having to go out and find people every day for 50 years. I've got to tell you, I know which one I prefer. Okay, so how do you keep it fresh and consistent without suddenly, falling into a rigid script or, pitching on rails?
It's easier than you'd think, actually, because it's just, and this is my mantra of what to do. It's keeping my bloody mouth shut, to be honest. You start it off with an opening question, you listen, pause once they finish speaking, which I think most salespeople fail to do. They'll look for that nugget of information, jump on it. It's about keeping your mouth closed for as long as possible, really. And I think you ask a question when you're going in, and then you go with whatever they're saying rather than the agenda you want to push, which is a big transition. So yeah, I think that's what I found. And whilst business problems don't vary that much, there are only so many things that can be going right or wrong in a company, financially, emotionally, whatever. You listen, and then and I think I learned this from Benjamin Dennehy. It's asking why. This might seem like a silly question. I'm just asking why that's happening, and then they'll give you a reason. And then with that, you unpack that more, and then you can really get to the bottom of why certain things are happening. And that's why it doesn't say, it's not repeatable, because you're letting the client, I'm not running the conversation. That's the big difference. Something that's repeatable is product pitching. When you're going to understand what's going on in the client's world, and then occasionally, you've got to speak about a product at some point. You can't just go and be an emotional counselor for the rest of your life, unless you're in that line of work. They're leading the conversation. You're only going into your product at the point where, and you don't jump on it where you say, this will fix your problem. You wait, and they're running the conversation. You're just literally mediating it to find out what they're doing, why they're doing it, and where the gaps might be.
So on that note, are there any rituals or practices that you do on a regular basis in order to keep yourself in the right lanes and to remind yourself of if you're deviating?
I think it's the key. Are going to bring this back to mentorship. I would say technique, but getting feedback, real-time feedback from colleagues. Listen yourself to your own. I know it's excruciatingly painful says the guy on a podcast, to listen back to yourself and think, just completely waffling, little things that you can pick up on. So asking other people, that's the best way of doing it. People are going to give you the God's honest truth. Listening to yourself, and something which was a really good, very good learning I had from one of your podcasts, Marcus, is I'm going to make myself really vulnerable now at the end of a sales call. How was my performance here? Have you seen better? And please, don't compliment me. I want to know exactly where I could have done and where I could have improved. That's how you can stay very uncomfortable in your day-to-day life, but you will improve by the day.
Go looking for evidence that you're wrong. Go looking for bad news and run to the sound of gunfire. Those are the bylines here, because you're not going to learn from knowing what you already know. And your customers are your best teachers, as is failure, but only if you learn from them. And Ed's point is you need to take control of your own development, and you are responsible for your number. You are responsible for how you show up, and you are responsible for what you learn. Waiting for someone else to foot the bill, to rescue you. What advice would you give to people who are procrastinating because they're hoping their company will pay for it, or they expect the company to provide training?
You're probably in the wrong role. I would find role models. I think I won't deny, I think that's probably the frame of mind I had. You need to find role models. It's very easy to do this online. You don't need to go and knock on people's doors physically. There are plenty of people out there. I've got a handful of influential people in my career who I either listen to if they're developing content, or reaching out to them independently and saying here's what I'm doing wrong. It's about making yourself vulnerable and understanding where you're falling short. I appreciate that doesn't just come from thin air. That's something where you need to have that initial sense of, I don't have any motivation. I don't even know if I like my job. I think we've all had that. We all fall into sales. I was a very bizarre case where I actually wanted to join sales for all of my sins and probably a previous life. But in the event where you're thinking, what on earth am I doing in this awful role where I'm being told to go away constantly? My big piece of recommendation would be find a role model. You can find them through listening to podcasts, YouTube content, and then learn their perspective professionally. I'm talking sales, enablement, and whatever, self-help. Take those concepts. I did it from the likes of Benjamin Dennehy. The guys from We Have a Meeting are exceptional on the phone. Jerry Hill's another one. For the WAM guys are, they're quite light-hearted on the phone, and I could relate to that more with my personality. If you're more of an assertive personality type, Jerry Hill's the one. I've never heard somebody cold calling sound so much like a CEO. And then get in touch with these people, and this is where you can think, you know what, I completely agree with their perspective and their philosophy around this. I'm going to start implementing it. Most of the time it's free. It just requires you to sit there and listen to something for half an hour a day, a week, whatever that might be.
So if someone is stuck, what's the one belief or assumption that they really need to challenge first?
Stop pointing the finger. It is unfortunately on you. You are, I would say, replaceable to a company for as long as you've got that finger pointing mentality. And you know what? That's not to say that companies are in the right, because often companies are far from in the right. As we all know, it's about finding your place. But if you've accepted and signed a contract to work at a company, give it a good bloody go. Accept a bit of pain, but don't point the finger and expect the company to train you, because to be honest, it's a tough one, but it's your career. The companies know that people will be working there for 3, 4, 5, 10 years. It's up to you. You're going to deal with that for your life. So I would say make a move quickly. It usually doesn't cost anyone any money, and start working on yourself, and don't point the finger. It's your responsibility to train yourself, not a company.
Absolutely. You've got to own your role. You have a job to do, which is make your target. Now, mission is making the target. Purpose is how you do it. And I think one of the most important lessons that we always push on the podcast is that how you show up and how you sell matters more than what you sell. Would you concur?
Completely.
So given that the product is never the real issue, neither is price, what is the real issue?
It's time for me. Is this relevant at this given point in time? I have the luxury of working in an industry where typically somebody would require the product that I represent at any given point in time over the course of a year. That doesn't mean you can behave like an arse as a salesperson. You've still got a job to do, and you've still got to make sure that you are on their radar without bombarding them daily. What does that require? A relationship. Intent will be remembered. Your product probably won't be, but be damn sure if you behave like an arse, just like all of us, right? We're going to remember that experience for the rest of our days, frankly. Everybody remembers a bad experience or a good experience. What people won't remember is the technicality of your platform and why it does this with AI and how it supported all of these competitors of one company and this, that, and the other. The intent is the part that will be remembered, and that's effectively one of the most powerful parts of being a salesperson. If you can be remembered for the right reasons, people are going to pick up the phone to you when they need you, rather than you picking up the phone when you need them, which is never a good stance to have as a salesperson, because that's where desperation comes in, and then you start disturbing people. So do the right thing at the first given opportunity, and then wait.
So that then brings me to the next question. How much do you discount?
I'm not familiar with the word now. Only joking.
I'm sorry, say again. Okay, so let's ask the right question, which is, when did you realize that you didn't have to discount, and what impact has that had on your billables?
And this comes back to my previous point around having people who you look up to, and you can see discounting when you really look at it on a surface level. As a junior salesperson, you think discounting, this is a fast track to me getting a sale through. That's going to make me look good. When you actually delve into the deeps of what discounting actually means and what the person who's going to purchase from is going to think, one, it's insincere, frankly. You're giving them a different price than one that you are. You're effectively lying to people. It should be avoided at all costs. There are some instances where it might be helpful, but Jesus Christ, you have to go and ask them for something back in return. Otherwise, it's effectively gross misconduct and insincere selling. And gross misconduct externally, you're doing something that's not fundamentally the truth. You're providing with so you're getting one over somebody. So that was the point when I realized. And then you also realize if value has been discussed and delivered, and you understand that they need the product, again, in our personal lives, when we buy something, you can go to Apple and say, when you sold yourself and getting a new iPhone, you wouldn't have the audacity of going to the person at the Apple store and saying, 20% discount, please. Why? I'll pay for it today. It just doesn't work like that. Buying is buying, whether it's commodities or whether it's professional services, whatever it is. And that's something I think people need to stop disregarding. It carries a great deal of importance.
Well, the ripple effects as well. At renewal, you're already starting, let's say, 20% down. So the following year, you're starting from 20% down. So you might put 10% on, but that's not enough. You're still behind, and you're always going to be behind. This has a really harmful effect on cash flow. It also has a drift effect, because as you start to discount, it also means that you have to prospect more, because you need more at the top of the funnel, because you're essentially letting profit walk out of the door at the bottom.
Totally. And procurement always remember which suppliers are truly happy with discounts.
Yeah.
Would be naive to think they don't have their own internal systems where this stuff is documented, just like a salesperson would have around a specific prospect. Procurement remember this, and if you want to be almost blacklisted on their list of when we need a really dirty deal, or when we've got 3 proposals, we need a 4th, you'll be the first one on the list. That costs your team, company a lot of time delivering proposals that are effectively bogus, and then there's a huge downstream effect from that.
Well, again, when you consider what the cost of a pursuit, win or lose, is, in enterprise, it averages around 40 grand. If you're selling to government, it could easily be $1 million plus, and hundreds of people could be involved. And then you give away your margin for years and years and years. Start developing a better money concept by focusing not on the commoditized product or even comparing it with other products. How does the experience of buying from you outweigh any ROI, so they would hate to be without it and hate to not have you on their team? Now, that's yeah. So I'm curious that you've obviously gone through this journey. If someone is really struggling and they don't want to just tweak it, they want to transform, what's the story in their head that needs to change?
The big switch I think people need to make is if they are if they're massively discontent in their role, they need to make themselves. It's vulnerability is the key part here, which is an uncomfortable topic. Nobody wants to make themselves particularly uncomfortable and vulnerable in front of people who, frankly, you need to go to people who know more than you. They perform better than you, or they're in a position of power to your current role. That would be the starting point. The good news is it's very easy with the correctly crafted message to get a positive response from somebody, as we've said with the mentorship part. If somebody at junior level is thinking, they're in that kind of position, they will need to make themselves more uncomfortable in order to become more comfortable at a later stage. But it does require that push, and nobody's going to come and say, I'd love to mentor you, John. I've seen you struggling, I can help you. You might get the odd one. It's not very common. Don't wait for people to come and help you. Go and push for it. And if you push, you get to choose who's mentoring you or who's helping you. Get feedback across the team. There's lots of things you can do. Most things in life that you require a big upfront fee. Like I say, this isn't one of those. This is something where you're going to get a pretty good response, and everybody's feeling very good about it. So yeah, I can't urge people enough at the junior level to push for that.
If anyone is considering a move and they want to make the right choice so that they don't move from frying pan to fire, DM me, because we've developed the Career Pathfinder, which helps you to work out what it is you're hiring the job to do for you, so that it gives you what you want in life. We have a very Southern European view of work, which is we work to live, as opposed to the Northern European and American version, which is we live to work. You are not in sales because you want to work 18-hour days. You're in sales because you want to work 90-minute days, and then the other 22 and a half hours are yours to do with what the hell you like. Start adopting an intelligently lazy approach. What is the least effort that is required to get the best possible outcome? And start removing the obstacles, the clutter, your ego, your attachment, the way things have always been done around here, and start really asking the question, is there a better way? And inevitably, you will find it. Is that fair?
Very fair. And a key thing, I think, just on that last point, is when however junior you might be, an interview with a prospective company, that you are effectively prospect, they are seller. We need to, I think, just switch that perception that the employer has all of the power, regardless of whether you're unemployed or employed. I think people need to stand very firm and understand you should be questioning these companies, seeing how they're behaving when you challenge them. Are they pushing you? Are they rude? Do they seem like they care? Going for these little tactics in interviews to actually understand and keep that power firmly in the middle, if not in your favor. So I think that's something that people also should really consider, regardless of level of seniority.
Well, in this market, especially because we're already seeing these patterns, people are being laid off. There are more sales jobs than salespeople. And in that kind of economy, it's very easy to fall into the trap of going down the recruitment route and going down through recruiters. The reality is, if you want to get your next job, if you follow Ed's advice and you build those mentors up, there's no reason why they couldn't be future bosses. And you could have been working with them 12, 18 months, 15 minutes a month, and they've already got a relationship with you. So when a vacancy comes up, who do they call? So that's one approach. Another approach which we found, I had a recruitment client who realized when we worked together that actually people aren't filling a vacancy. They're trying to get a job done. And he was in the pharmaceutical and life sciences market, generating not only retainers, but 50% fee on first year's total guaranteed gross emoluments. So that includes salary, bonuses, golden hellos, all the benefits, life, health, dental, car, stock options, 50% fee. Because if you're placing a CMO who's going to get you to raise 300 million, paying 150 grand is nothing. So again, think about the value that you bring. If you're a recruiter, you are doing the most important job out there, because managers only have have four functions: hire the best people, create the conditions for them to do excellent work every day, their best work, protect them from acts of idiocy from above, especially from you, and empower them to make good decisions well so you don't have to, and teach them how to empower others, like their customers and their peers, so that they smooth the path. They're not creating friction and obstacles that are unnecessary. Is that fair? Yeah? Excellent. Okay. And Ed, we're coming to the end, and this has been absolute gold. You've lived what so many people are trying to figure out, and your clarity and your candor will help more people than you know, I think. So before we wrap up, is there anything that you want to leave people with, a thought, a challenge, or even a next step if they want to explore this path?
Yeah, I mean, I've touched on it before, but I think just in terms of if people are looking for inspiration for different sales techniques, I'm very biased to UK-based sales, the US-based salespeople. That there are other ones that might be more specific to your market, but from a UK perspective, we have a meeting. WAM guys, I really can't emphasize enough how good they are at giving you just a perspective and just showing they're very open around when they get rejected and when they get a positive outcome on a call. They do it in 15-minute chunks. That's very good. Breeze past their initial small talk, their excruciatingly painful jokes at the beginning. It's only take about 15 seconds, and then from that point, it's very, very good and value adding. Benjamin Dennehy is, if you want a combination of stand-up comedian whilst you're learning how to be a better seller, he is absolutely. I mean, he's a bit extreme, but he is absolutely probably the one of the best in the industry.
Who trained him?
I know. I'm keeping you out of it after the previous endorsements, but these are just some examples. And even audiobooks like Bob Mester's Demand Side Sales. That's a very good one for switching your perspective around how does this bloody process that's excruciatingly painful work, and even how to make friends and influence people. That's a good start. I learned quite a lot from that book.
Your career's taken some really interesting turns, so let's just wrap up on that. I mean, you're a 30-year-old salesman. You've been doing this a while, and now you're a board director. What on earth caused you to choose to do that, and how is that helping you in your day-to-day role?
Yeah, no, this is a really good point, and kudos to another person I'd recommend, Callum Lang from the Veblen community. So there's a philosophy and I would say a movement started for private equity companies where board seats, the traditional structure of a board is becoming slightly outdated. Why? There's a common trend in what would qualify somebody as a board member, industry exec, 40 years, 30 years in industry. They've seen it all. That's all great. I mean, that represents a demographic, and I think that's very valuable because, frankly, I, as a sales guy, I can't talk about what happened in 1997 other than what cartoons are on the TV. The way that it's going now to diversify, and I know, the white British guy talking about diversity, haha, very funny, is becoming very important. The diversity of ideas and having somebody who is effectively a salesperson amongst other roles on the front line being told yes and no, sometimes up to 5 times a day. And if you add that into a year, if you get replies at the weekend, knocking on 1900 times a year, you're understanding exactly the way that the market is moving from the horse's mouth. That's very valuable because typically very senior execs won't have been humbled or, had a yes, we would like to buy from you, potentially for a very long time. And that's where this fresh set of ideas can be of the utmost importance. It's a very new concept which gives small companies seeking to exit a very nice, by the way, we've got a board of directors. You know what, we're thinking about it a little bit differently. We've got your kind of, standard people on there. And then we've also thrown in some more, we've got a 27-year-old who's giving us perspective around what the market wants. They hear yes and no regularly, and it really gives you a nice added benefit. It typically costs a company very little money, but the returns on it really represent a bigger picture of the market rather than just looking on a P&L sheet and talking about what might have happened 20 years ago and getting very confused why numbers aren't potentially where we expect it, versus speaking to somebody saying there's a bloody pandemic on or whatever that might be, people are crying out for this kind of service, we don't have it, let's tweak. Can be unusual to sit in a position, but from my interactions that I've had so far, that can come, it's very welcomed, insight that people don't have.
Excellent. So final thought or challenge for somebody who's looking to take the next step in their career path. What question or challenge would you throw down for them?
Stop products pitching, peddling. The least important thing in the prospect's life, unless they're sitting on the P&L of your company, which most of the time they won't be. They're not interested in the product you're pitching. They have their own infinite amounts of agendas within their role and within their life that they're trying to achieve. That's what you need to focus on. Move completely off the product. Speak to prospects one-on-one. Understand where they're at. Understand, one, is this a good time? And if it is, find the right way for them, not for you and your internal targets, because that's not their problem. So I would take a step back and actually speak to these people as human beings, which is what they are, and stop prioritizing your own targets, priorities, and commission scheme. It's about you succeeding for them. And at the point when people start thinking that way, in that light, everything else will fall into place and typically sales will go up, at least from my perspective.
Charlie Green in Trust-Based Selling says that we should write business so good that both sides, given identical conditions, would sign up instantaneously 100 times in a row. Now, as a standard, that sets our sights exceptionally high. Now, chances are you're going to fall short. But if that is the intent, as opposed to how quickly can I do this drive-by shooting and take their money, you're going to leave them with a very, very different impression, because there's something called the peak end rule. And the peak end rule says that you will remember the peak emotion and the end emotion in the last interaction that you had with another person. So if the peak emotion was, you pissed me off and I was left uncertain, chances are I'm going to ghost you. Make sure that the peak emotion is one of excited, anticipatory curiosity, and the end emotion builds on that and leaves them wanting more. So they're pulling you in as opposed to you pushing and trying to break through their barriers.
Totally.
Okay, this has been absolutely wonderful. First of all, thank you. Thank you for your honesty and candor. I can't wait to see what's next. What's next on your agenda?
Well, I'm running my own company at the moment, so contracting in with different companies within the pharma space. Still very unclear, I think, and I'm embracing just the lack of clarity in terms of where I want to go. I'm flirting with different ideas, and having conversations with people on this more personal level can give you not only careers advice, but it can give you all sorts of ideas of what might be right and wrong for you. So at the moment, I'm pretty bloody happy and just enjoying what I'm doing at the moment. But yeah, exploring new avenues in the pharma industry, and hopefully staying in sunny Spain for the foreseeable. So yeah, can't complain.
Do you want people to get in touch?
Yeah, no, absolutely. If anybody does want to have any tips or whatever, the best email to get me is edward.ingham@biofarm, farmer, not farmers in ducks and chickens, biofarm, PHARM-BD.com. So edward.ingham@biofarmbd.com. Yeah, otherwise reach out on LinkedIn and I can get back to you there.
Edward Ingham, thank you.
Thank you.
So this is Marcus Cauchi signing off once again from the Inquisitor podcast. If you've enjoyed this or found it useful, then please share it, comment, get in touch. In the meantime, stay safe and happy selling.